Story 1. We should really tone down Christmas gift giving among adults. I think many people would enjoy the holidays more if they did not stress about finding the perfect life-changing gift for everyone in their life. Instead, we should stick to simple things like treats and small gifts. Story 2. As a teacher, parents are the most challenging, with school division and state or provincial policymakers coming in a close second. Without parents lobbying for lowering academic and behavior standards, and without out-of-touch bureaucrats making decisions about how teachers do their jobs, it would be a much better job than it is currently. Story 3. A double cheeseburger should have 2 slices of cheese. If it only has 1 slice, it should be called a double with cheese. No one seems to agree with me and thinks that I am being petty. Story 4. Barring medical conditions, if your child is obese, you are a bad parent. No, I am not the food police type of mom. My kids can enjoy whatever they want to an extent, but sodas at every meal or a whole bag of chips in one sitting is a no. We still keep sweets around, but they are learning moderation and self-control through our actions and reminders. Story 5. Not everyone should be allowed to have children, and not everyone should be allowed to raise children. Some people have health issues that they should not pass on to their kids. My brother-in-law has Crohn's disease. His father had it, and all 3 of his children have it. Even my mother-in-law has told the grandchildren not to have children. Some people should not be raising children either. Some are not mentally or emotionally capable of handling the responsibilities of raising children. I made my own doctor's appointments starting in middle school. I never got the braces I needed, even though my father was willing to pay, because my mother didn't want to do the work. She was not capable of caring about another person. I was just an accessory to get her attention, and when I was no longer cute, I was on my own. My sister-in-law openly said in front of her son that she did not want him. She only had him to keep his father around. I have heard someone say they wanted another child, so the Department of Housing and Urban Development would give them a bigger house. I knew a woman who abused her children so badly she broke their bones. Child Protective Services took her children away multiple times but returned them after she passed the parenting classes they required. I have encountered multiple people who neglected their children because of drugs, alcohol, or a boyfriend. There are some people who should not have children. Story 6. You do not have to have everything in your life follow a linear progression. Run your own race. Social media has really distorted people's minds in this regard. Story 7. If people are making out in public, I am allowed to watch up close. Story 8. I like how nice summer looks, but it is too hot no matter where I go. Autumn feels much nicer and looks just as amazing in its own right. Story 9. I really do not care what people do with their own bodies, up to and including selling their organs, although I would advise them not to. Story 10. Cheese does not need to go on everything. Many things taste better without cheese. Story 11. Physician-assisted dying, or euthanasia, should be available not only to terminally ill people but also to those whose quality of life is poor. Story 12. Electrons should absolutely be positive. I am okay with switching positive and negative on everything to accomplish this. Positive and negative notation is completely arbitrary, so I am not asking to change the laws of physics. I am asking to change how we name negative charge. It makes a lot more sense this way. Story 13. If a pet is very old but healthy, they should not be put down, in my opinion. I understand the need to euthanize a pet when they are sick and in pain, but many animals are simply put down because they have reached an age the owners consider too old. It is honestly cruel. If the pet is healthy, let the dog live as long as it can. Story 14. Umbrellas are more trouble than they are worth. If the rain is blowing sideways, you will still get wet. If it is a light drizzle, it is not worth using an umbrella for how little you will get wet. If it is heavy rain, your umbrella will likely break. I dislike dealing with a soaking wet umbrella and finding a place for it once I am inside. I would rather get drenched in most cases than deal with an umbrella. Story 15. Most soldiers are not heroes but uneducated people with no real future. Story 16. I am tired of Rihanna and have stopped listening when the radio plays her old songs as if they are still current. Story 17. The punishment for littering should be much more severe, and businesses with cost-cutting measures that willfully pollute the environment should be closed down or heavily fined. Story 18, we are worthless. No matter how successful you are, how rich, how famous, you are just food for bacteria, and in 100 years nobody will remember you. You will be as if you never existed. It struck me when visiting Medinet Abu's temple in Luxor half a lifetime ago. The place is well preserved. You can also visit the ruins of the small palace where the pharaoh would stay while touring the temples, including the throne room, also known as the reception room. You look at frescoes, you see the king offering rewards to officials, you think about the harem conspiracy, his murder, the executions, all these plots and conspiracies. For what? To have a bunch of tourists walk into your private chambers and enter rooms that were forbidden for the commoners? Story 19. Compared to the current Republican Party presidential nominee, Richard M. Nixon was a sane, intelligent, dedicated public servant. Now, I am old enough to remember watching Nixon resign his presidency on live television. My father, who was a dedicated Republican, absolutely hated Nixon. It was the biggest political scandal in American history and the only time a United States president resigned in shame. But he did resign, and he was on the edge of tears in that speech. Why? Because he had served the country his entire life. He started out in the military. Nixon was a veteran, then went into public office and stayed in public service until the end. He was emotional because his entire career was collapsing and he was never going to be able to serve again. Now, was he a crook? Absolutely. He was a slimy, sleazy, racist individual who did unspeakable things as president and tried to hang on to power through nefarious means that, honestly, seem quaint by today's standards. But I think that on some level, he did all those horrible things because he believed that was the best way to serve America. He was an ends justify the means person, but on some level, he meant well. The current nominee does not care about his country. He has never served anyone or anything but himself. Nixon, compared to him, is a patriot. Story 20. Apparently, thinking jobs should pay for your commute is unpopular. Story 21. Dogs are not humans, and their owners need to stop treating them as if they are. Your dog does not want to go to the grocery store, the mall, or a crowded brunch restaurant with you. Story 22. Most good people are only good as long as it is convenient for them and will bend or go against their morals and ethics when it becomes too inconvenient. They often try to excuse their actions with vague nonsense about nuance or common sense. Additionally, common sense, as it is used today, is a destructive concept that hinders people's ability to grow. It makes people afraid to ask questions for fear of condescending answers like, "That is common sense." It reduces empathy for people's struggles because what they face is dismissed as common sense. It is often used as a crutch to avoid teaching by assuming people automatically know something because it is common sense. We would be better off if we discarded the concept of common sense and started explaining things regardless of whether we think someone should already know them. Story 23. Fun gameplay is much more important than story in video games. Story 24. Treating prisoners with kindness and respect is entirely moral and does not imply disrespect towards their victims. No exceptions. Story 25. Cookies with raisins are awesome, and cookies with raisins and semi-sweet or dark chocolate chips are even better. Story 26. Individuals aged 18 and under should have restricted and limited access to the internet, confined to educational purposes within the school environment only. Story 27. I really liked the new Cowboy Bebop, and I am sad it was canceled. Story 28. Two immediately came to mind. The first is that I think we think about economics all wrong. Neither gross domestic product nor employment rate gives much meaningful information. Gross domestic product only measures how much the price of sales of goods and services amounts to, but it does not tell you who or what is doing transactions. It is entirely possible for a society to exist where some hyper-rich people are exchanging money back and forth on overpriced luxury while half the population cannot afford to save up, and it would appear that country has a high gross domestic product. Conversely, if production meets all demands, measuring how many people are looking for a job but cannot find one does not mean much. The purpose of society should not be to employ as many people as possible into pointless labor, but rather to meet the needs of the population If people cannot find jobs but have access to all the goods and services they need, why does it matter if they cannot find work? At that point, distributing wealth so that all needs are met becomes more important than busy work for busy work's sake. The second is hyperspecific. Progressive metal fans will almost certainly be familiar with the band Opeth. The fan-favorite Opeth album is Blackwater Park, but I think it is actually one of their least interesting albums. It marked a directional shift into a much cleaner, less raw style, but I think the folk elements were more interesting on all of their previous work. I also think they had stronger songwriting. On all of the other albums from the era Blackwater Park comes from, Deliverance feels riffier and meaner, Ghost Reveries feels much more atmospheric with more robust songwriting, and Watershed has Heir Apparent and Hessian Peel, which for my money both blow anything on Blackwater Park out of the water. I think Blackwater Park is a good album, but I really cannot wrap my head around it being the fan favorite. Story 29. I support the death penalty and also believe no prison sentence should exceed 20 years, though this is slightly negotiable. It makes no sense to jail someone for the rest of their life. If the goal is to prevent them from returning to society, then execute them. If you believe in rehabilitation, there are clearly diminishing returns. If someone suggests a maximum of 10 years, I am willing to listen. Long prison terms do not make sense. Consider the amount of violence that occurs in prison because of life sentences. Also, when an innocent person is wrongly convicted, is imprisoning them until death really a lesser violation? Story 30. The biggest problem Black people face in this country is from other Black people. Story 31. I am more liberal than you are on abortion. I am more conservative on gun control than you are. Story 32. If you are going to require people to work in the office, you should relax the dress code. Most of us barely want to leave home and deal with all the stress, so wearing jeans or shorts would not cause a business to fail. Story 33. The Second Amendment is often misunderstood by gun enthusiasts who treat it as sacred text. If James Madison had provided guidance on managing roads and traffic when roads were dirt and travel was primarily by horses and wagons, would we still follow those ideas today given how much has changed? From flintlock muskets to modern firearms, is that really any different? No. Story 34. Graphical fidelity adds almost nothing to a video game. However, it can make the whole experience look worse, without a doubt. Story 35. The National Football League and college football are overly hyped. Half of the broadcast consists of commercials, highlights, replays, players celebrating, announcers praising, and analyzing. The actual game seems secondary to the excitement. Story 36. I honestly think naps are overrated. They always make me feel worse when I wake up instead of refreshed. I would rather just power through the day and sleep at night. Story 37. Weirdly, this ends up being unpopular when I mention it. Anyone found abusing disabled parking spaces should have their vehicles removed. In all but a few specific cases, if the vehicle's value is above a certain amount, the local council should sell it and use the money for their budgets. If the value is below a certain amount, the vehicle should be crushed and left on the previous owner's driveway with a bill for the crushing cost. Story 38. I genuinely believe we are effectively alone in the universe. I think we are a product of a complete fluke of sexual selection, and I do not think sapient life is inevitable on a planet full of rich biodiversity. The dinosaurs lasted long enough without it, and there was no reason to suspect they would have evolved it. Even a fluke may happen multiple times if the numbers are large enough, so I will not say there are no intelligent extraterrestrial beings anywhere in the universe. However, I believe creatures with intelligence on par with or above humans are so rare that we will never meet them. For me, the Fermi paradox has a simple solution. There simply is no one else out there. Story 39. The pineapple on pizza debate is boring, foolish, and a waste of conversation. 1/5 of the posts below are about it. People bring it up as if they are being funny or interesting, but it just shows me you do not have any truly interesting, unpopular opinions to stand behind. Story 40. The death penalty should apply only to policing agencies and reserved for the worst crimes they commit. If you are using your power to commit the worst crimes, I am sorry, but you are not a good person. If anything, your life is worse than worthless since you are actively harming someone else. Additionally, the death penalty is a strong deterrent. Story 41. George Walker Bush should be brought before the International Court of Justice. Story 42. Fat shaming is not a good practice. Being overweight is unhealthy, and sometimes being direct and honest is necessary. I became less sympathetic toward obese people when I realized that half the world is starving. Story 43. Proposals are unnecessary. Not like getting engaged, but proposals where the man is on one knee with a bunch of roses and some doves, and the woman is wearing a white dress with her hair and nails done. Both parties have clearly agreed to get married. Given the outfit choice, there has been a discussion about the timing. Instead of spending hundreds of dollars on flowers and a photographer for a staged surprise, just call yourselves engaged and move on. Story 44. I will never support the phrase, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. No, people should know the truth about themselves. Story 45. Use human clones for scientific experiments and animal clones for food. However, they will probably be exploited for cheap labor and cannon fodder. Story 46. I find individuals like PewDiePie pseudo-intellectual and hypocritical. Story 47. Abolish the death penalty. Rework the system to rehabilitate people more effectively and reduce the prison population. Provide decent and improved conditions in prisons. Keep those who are truly dangerous, such as murderers and rapists, incarcerated for life. Separate individuals convicted of sexual offenses against children to prevent them from being housed together. Story 48. Once you turn 68, your voting rights are removed. No one over the age of 68 can run for office either. Laws are introduced to protect you from exploitation by politicians, including matters related to pensions. If your wealth reaches $1 billion, you are immediately taxed 100% on everything beyond that amount. This includes purchases that hold your wealth, such as stocks, land, or capital. Story 49. In my opinion, 22 weeks is too long a limit for abortion. In many cases, by week 5, by weeks 10 to 15, you should be able to arrange an abortion if it is legal in your state. 22 weeks or longer should be reserved for cases when the health of the mother is in danger. Sex education should be mandatory. Many girls have no idea how to avoid getting pregnant. Story 50. Religion should be seen as just another belief system, and every attempt should be made to ban it and deprogram the people involved for the sake of human civilization. Story 51. Russian Full House original Full House. Story 52. The Electoral College is still useful, and deciding the president by popular vote would be a nightmare of constant recounts. Story 53. If a presidential candidate does not appeal to you, you do not have to vote. It is their job to explain why they should help run an entire country for years. This is not about selling a product, so if they are not doing an exemplary job, I will hold them to a higher standard to earn my support. I already know who I am voting for in November, so please do not argue otherwise. Story 54. There is no need to put ice in a fountain drink from a restaurant. It comes out cold, so you do not need it. The ice will melt, which waters down your drink. You also get less of the drink if you fill the cup with ice. Story 55. The Earth has been overpopulated and is becoming unsustainable due to human consumption since shortly after the Industrial Revolution. Story 56. If Donald Trump wins the election, not much will change. He certainly will not become a dictator. Story 57. I never cared if my kids swore. They knew they couldn't do it in public because people might be offended, but at home with family it was no big deal. They mostly didn't swear anyway, but I found it strange trying to explain that but and asks mean the same thing, but one is acceptable to say and the other is not. I couldn't explain who made the rules or why, and it became clear how illogical it is. I was never a fan of because I said so. Story 58. Threatening people on social media or sending them hateful messages should be illegal and charged as hate crimes. Story 59. I honestly think gladiatorial combat to the death among consenting adults should be legal. Also, public punishment should return, from the stocks to the gibbets to execution. Story 60. Every president since Ronald Reagan has been more conservative than liberal. Story 61. Summer is the best season and 85 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature. Cold weather is unpleasant, and anyone who prefers winter is unreasonable. Story 62. I have said this before, but I will say it again. The public has an obligation to curate and remove certain adult-themed books from elementary, middle, and, in some cases, high schools. Recently, there was an uproar over the removal of 42 of Stephen King's 65 titles from Florida school libraries. I have read many of his books. They often contain passages of sex and graphic violence, which are simply not appropriate for young students as casual reading. Story 63. In light of damning evidence, execute them by the most cost-effective method to end the life of a death row inmate. There is no reason to provide free room and board when it is proven they are unable to change for the better. Story 64. Another one I am dreading to say, but I think allowing transgender women to compete in women's sports is unfair. Story 65. Music. Unless I am actively listening to a piece of music and want it in my head, I find music at best extremely annoying. The habit of adding music to everything in every situation, which seems to be a nervous tic most people have, is infuriating. For example, in a cafe or restaurant I want to eat or drink. I may want to talk to my friends, read, study, or do something else. Music interferes with all that. It hijacks part of my brain that I want to be using. Another example is videos on YouTube. For instance, a cute dog doing cute things is nice, but some person adds music to the background. Why? You also see this with people reading poems or giving talks about math or history. Why? My theory is that most people cannot live with what is going on in their heads and have to constantly play music to block out their own inner darkness. Fine, you do you. But why should I have to hear it too? Story 66. The first few seasons with the original cast of Saturday Night Live were widely overrated and are not even in the top 20 seasons for consistent humor. Story 67. I prefer the conventional marketing tactics and branding of the 1990s to early 2000s over modern minimalist and market research styles of today. Story 68. In the United States of America, we should return to voting for the top two candidates for president and vice president regardless of political affiliation. Story 69. The only way wealthy people can get richer is if you spend or use their products and services. They also become wealthier by acquiring your future money through loans if your current money is not enough. If that is not enough, they will take your children's current and future earnings as well. Story 70. The world as we know it is already in terminal decline due to climate change. It is too late to reverse it, and the tragedy of the commons guarantees that we would not take action even if it could still be saved. Life is going to get much worse. Story 71. Politicians should not be allowed to talk about abortion. If someone wants one badly enough, they will get one. And people who are completely against it do not need to get one. Politicians can better spend their energy on improving something that benefits the whole country, such as not requiring citizens to spend $30,000 to fix a broken leg. Story 72. Apparently, if someone gets cheated on, you should tell them. To those who think otherwise, I hope you experience being cheated on and do not find out until 10 years later. Story 73. Raising the minimum wage does not help poor people. I came to this conclusion after moving to Australia, which has a high minimum wage, and observing the high prices of goods. Every year they increased the minimum wage, and every year shortly after, the prices of inexpensive items went up. Then I started looking at other countries with higher wages, and they all have a very expensive cost of living. Next, I examined poorer countries and realized that the market adjusts to fit the wages. If there are poor people, there will be a market to serve them. Increase their wages, and that market adjusts upwards. It seems like some unseen force at work. The final proof was in the United States, where the effective minimum wage started hovering around $15 an hour, nearly double the official minimum. The prices of all the cheaper goods almost exactly doubled. Food, rent, drinks almost exactly double. So I do not think it is helping. Maybe it is, but how? If you never have to buy anything, maybe then. But who never has to buy anything? I do not have any solution for helping people. Maybe we need more competition or increased supply. I am not an economist, but this is what I noticed over several years. The only thing raising wages really seems to help is people's sense of doing the right thing. However, it is not actually helping much. I think this sense is misguided, and if we truly cared, we would figure out what really works. Story 74. We should encourage adoption as the primary way to become a parent and discourage pregnancy. This is the same reason we encourage adopting pets from a shelter rather than buying a pet from a breeder. Story 75. Apparently saying genocide is a deal breaker when talking about politics on Reddit. Story 76. We need to monitor the growth of our civilization by limiting the number of newborns per family worldwide. Otherwise, we may eventually face famine if we lose control of natural food production. Story 77. Dark Souls 2 is the best of the trilogy. What it lacks in crisp movement and combat, it more than makes up for with an incredible story beyond what Dark Souls I or 3 offer. Story 78. Better Call Saul had some weak writing in the last few seasons. Gus showing up derailed the entire story, and we did not need to see him taking on the cartel again. I did not feel like Saul was even the main character in many episodes. Story 79. Ranch really is not that tasty and people have way too much of it. Do you really need 12 extra ranch servings with your 10 wings? I think not. Story 80. Most rock music is somewhat boring. There are usually not many interesting solos by the instrumentalists. The lyrics are typically uninteresting or unintelligible, and the structures are basic. When rock music tries to be musically interesting, such as progressive rock, it can feel overly complex. There are exceptions, of course. Some Steely Dan songs have incredible musicality. Story 81. Being overweight is not something to be proud of and should not be encouraged. There are some medical conditions with extenuating circumstances, but overall, it should not be as acceptable as it is. Story 82. Reddit users not knowing what an unpopular opinion is. Name a more iconic duo. Story 83. Animals should not be enslaved and treated like products to be exploited for our gain. They should not suffer from cradle to grave for our whims. I cannot believe this is still controversial in 2024, but here we are. Story 84. I do not believe in complete freedom of speech or expression. In a public space, there are things that a government can and should be allowed to restrict through the law, namely those that infringe on the rights and dignity of other citizens of that country. Story 85. We need some kind of test to grant certain rights. Not everyone should have a driver's license just because they can operate a car. Not everyone should have the right to vote if they do not understand what they are voting for. And not everyone should be allowed to have children if they are not ready for that responsibility. I know it is not realistic. In the world we live in, people would abuse the system, and it would never be truly fair. But in a perfect world, this would be a perfect system. Story 86. Foreign aid is harmful and should cease in all forms. Story 87. Children should be protected from visiting religious institutions in democratic countries. Many people are concerned about inappropriate behavior related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning individuals. However, few pay attention to the more than 300,000 victims of sexual abuse from the Catholic Church in France since the 1950s. This number represents a large group of children who were abused by Catholic Christians. Their safety is often overlooked and appears to be a facade. Data from the United States and other countries also reveal serious issues. Even if children learn appropriate behavior, religion is often a significant factor behind inappropriate or violent actions, including sexual predation, child marriages, beheadings, and cults. Regarding existential crises, psychotherapy is available, and people do not need to rely on belief in an invisible entity to guide their lives. Story 88. The most unpopular opinion will be at the very bottom of all the comments here. Story 89. Dogmatic monogamy, as opposed to de facto monogamy, is problematic. I believe most of my other unconventional opinions would be somewhat popular here on Reddit. Story 90. Voting should be earned, and not everyone should automatically be able to vote. Story 91. Birth rates increasing should not necessarily be seen as positive. In a scenario where we face destruction by a conqueror who mismanages the remaining nations, we could use the continents south of the equator as the world's largest weapons range and ammunition dump. Even after deploying every available weapon to devastate the people in those countries, more than half of the global population would still remain. Story 92. Americans should be exposed to international elections and politics as much as Australians are exposed to United States elections and politics. Story 93. Most people are under some kind of hypnosis. I have been interested in the world and the universe since I was a child. I am 24 now and have discovered many esoteric things. One of them is how they socially engineer us. Even more than that, they outright brainwash us. Everyone who knows at least a little about psychology understands this. I can brainwash or manipulate an entire group of friends into doing and believing what I want. What do you think people with real power can do? Story 94. Traveling overseas is overrated. It is stressful, expensive, and it never looks as magical as you expect. Maybe the first couple of times, but it gets old. Most places look the same. Story 95. We do not need to raise the minimum wage. We need to gain control of the United States dollar. Story 96. That Jesus is the only way. People today do not care about that, but I recognize Jesus as the only one. He is the only salvation. Many will call me crazy, but this is true. Story 97. Every Reddit user who is struggling with addiction to sin can be healed permanently through the grace of Jesus Christ. Reject the pro-sin culture here. Those consoling voices of affirmation you find here are voices of destruction. Do not listen to them. Story 98. There is no point in starting to drink alcohol. It smells bad, tastes bad, and burns your throat. If you drink too much, you get a hangover and lose your memory of the supposedly great time you had while drunk. Alcohol is a depressant, so if you take it because you are depressed, it will not help and will actually make the depression worse. You can reach a point where you cannot walk, drive, or make coherent sentences. If drinking becomes a regular habit, you can become addicted and are more susceptible to assault, fights, and debt. Why even start? Story 99. The manufactured negative reputation of Donald Trump is a tool to make us continue voting for absolutely atrocious status quo candidates, despite the global economy's barely functioning, genocide, wars, and obvious elite theft. Story 100. While the Hamas attack on Israel last year was abhorrent and a disgusting, cowardly act with no justification, the subsequent Israeli response has been disproportionate and at times bordering on inhumane war crimes worthy of a certain fascist dictator. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.